Welcome to It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a podcast sponsored by the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. Located in the heart of the Texas Hill Country, the museum is dedicated to the preservation and promotion of the American West, especially through the art of the West. In this podcast series, we will visit with artists, art collectors, and gallery directors working in the Western art genre. We'll talk about the history and heritage of Western art, and we'll talk about why talking about Western art is so important. I'm Darrell Beauchamp, the Executive Director of the museum, and I'll be your host for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is a member of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.
If you haven't done so, please visit the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. We'd love to see you there.
And we're joined today on It's Art, Let's Talk About It by our good friend Steve Talley. Steve, welcome to It's Art, Let's Talk About It.
Thank you so much for having me.
For those of you who don't know, CS Steve Talley. In the art world, Steve paints under the initials CS Talley. And in conversation and among his friends, he's simply known as Steve. But we appreciate you joining us on It's Art, Let's Talk About It. One of the first questions I ask most people, let's talk about how you got started in the art world. And that's an important question because I asked it of our good friend Rachel Brownlee recently. And she's only been in the art world less than 3 years. And she's a 30-year-old woman who, but one day stumbled onto a skill set that basically somebody said you ought to take it to the next level, and she did. And yet I had a conversation with Ron Riddick recently. These are both podcasts you can go out and listen to on It's Art, Let's Talk About It. A little shameless plug there for them. But Ron's been painting since he was 3 years old. Jack Sorensen, the same kind of thing. Jack said he knew he was one of those guys who could paint from the day he first picked up a pencil and started scribbling on the wall, a crayon and scribbling on the wall. Were you one of those guys? Have you been painting forever, or is this a recent version of your life?
I have been painting half of my life.
Okay.
I am 68 years old, and so I started painting when I was 34. So I'm not one of those guys that, as a kid, scribbled on the walls.
So what did you do in the 34 years prior to that?
How much time you got?
I guess what led you to the art world?
What led me to the art world was probably the shortest story I can tell was in college. I have a degree in astronomy and physics, but you take electives.
Yeah, but you don't meet many artists who have degrees in astronomy and physics.
Not too many. There's a few, but not many. And so my roommate was an anthropology major, and I needed an elective. He said, why don't you take an anthropology course? And I looked through the offerings, and one of them was the Plains Indians of the United States.
Huh, okay.
So I took that elective, and that's what got me interested in the history of the West, particularly the Plains Indians. So fast forward, many years later, I marry my wife, Jeanette, and we start doing buckskinning.
Okay.
Which is mountain men reenactment.
Right.
But our camp was mostly Plains Indian style. We had teepee and we made our buckskin outfit and all that stuff. And that's what got the interest going. I wanted to have paintings, images in my house of that period. And this was at the time when Turpning and those guys, Ken Riley, are all pretty hot. And I went out to buy some, and I was like, I can't afford this stuff.
Right.
And so I told myself, phooey on that, I'm going to have to go paint my own.
Okay. Interesting.
And that's how I got started painting.
You remember your first class? Did you take classes?
At the time, we lived in a little town behind Pikes Peak called Woodland Park.
Okay.
In Colorado. And it was a whole 30-minute drive down into Colorado Springs, and I was working at the time related to my astronomy physics background.
So you were making a living doing something
Yes.
In your field.
Yes, which is an interesting story, too. I don't know how deep we want to dive there, but
It's our show. We can go anywhere we want to.
I was working with a company that had a contract with U.S. Space Command, and we operated large telescopes in Haleakala, Hawaii.
Okay.
and we supported their surveillance of Russian satellites. And so I'd drive down to work Monday through Friday, and I was looking for somebody to give me art lessons on the weekend.
Okay.
And there was only one lady in town that taught lessons, grudgingly to some degree. Sandra Harris was her name.
In Woodland Park.
In Woodland Park. She
Okay.
lived there, and she painted in acrylics. No, she painted, it's been too long. Anyway, I tried to start out painting in oil, and my wife wouldn't let me in after she realized all the hydrocarbons in the turpentine and the smell.
Yeah.
She's got a nose like a beagle, and things didn't settle. And I switched to acrylic. And Sandra agreed to teach me. And Sandra mostly did Western portraits, Indian maidens and stuff
Okay.
like that. And she actually showed at Settlers West, which was the same place where Turpentine showed.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a great gallery.
Yeah. And so she, basically, I started out painting portraits. When she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Landscape." She said, "I do portraits." And I was like, "You're
Let's
the only
paint portraits.
yeah, you're the only game in town. Let's do portraits." And so that's where I started to learn to paint. And then, beknownst to me, I didn't know anybody in the art world, didn't know who anybody was. And she said, "There's going to be a workshop here. Got some friends, and we've got this guy coming who's going to teach. And by the way, he's an acrylic painter." I said, "Who is he?" He said, "His name's Bob Wygant."
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so my first official workshop ever was with Bob Wygant.
All right. Not
And-
bad.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
bad.
Not bad.
And
And that's been 35 years ago.
yeah, coming up on 35 years.
At what point did you make a decision to give up your astronomy
I didn't.
and paint full time, or did you ever?
I didn't start painting full time. Art's always been the second layer of my living
Okay.
up until I basically retired. So I retired in 2009, which for some folks might be a little too early, but I was 54 when I quit doing the 8 to 5 thing.
Okay.
And so that gave me the opportunity to go full time. And if you ask me, are you a full-time artist? I'm going to say, yeah, between cutting trees in the backyard and doing all that kind of stuff. But I show in 3 galleries, and I sell on the average anywhere from 40 to 60 paintings a year. And so academically, I did not come up through that system
Right.
of learning to paint.
And it's fascinating when we talk to artists about how they got their start. There's some that are very formal in their, they have always known that's what they're going to do. They approached it very formally, and they've been painting for 50 years. Our good friend Jack Sorensen's, member of the Cowboy Artist of America, says he's been painting since he was 3. Ron Riddick, in a recent interview, told me that he grew up basically scribbling on cardboard box things that his dad's pressed shirts came in. And he's been painting his whole life. That's art is all he's ever known. And yet I'm fascinated when I find people like yourself. I find people like Rachel Brownlee comes along. She's a rancher, right? A rancher and a marathon runner and all of that. And she discovered art as a secondary thing, a way for her to, express. All I've ever known you is a painter. I didn't even know the astronomy. I started to say astrology, but the astronomy connection and the physics connection. And so it's fascinating when we find artists who have other lives other than in the art world.
My top layer of making a living up until 2009, my career started in the sciences and the physics and all of that.
Yeah.
And because of that, I had to learn to program, because the first Apple II the Apple II personal computer came out the year I graduated from college.
Okay.
And everybody's learning to program, and I did too.
It's mid-1970s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
78.
Yeah.
And once I learned to program, that was a whole other skill level that I could market. And I ultimately wound up making a career out of writing software, not so much for the sciences. I did for 5 years while we were operating the telescopes and stuff like that. We were developing a lot of image processing software. Anyway, we moved away from Colorado and came to San Antonio.
Right.
And I'm skipping a whole lot of stuff here, but I ultimately wound up writing software for a home builder. I wrote estimating software. For those who are in the San Antonio area, they may remember Ray Ellison, which was Rayco, and we were the major home builder there. And I worked in the estimating department. I wasn't pounding nails, but I was writing software to estimate.
That's fascinating.
And so I worked for them for many years, and ultimately when I moved to Fredericksburg, Texas, just prior to that move, I got away from the estimating software because another company bought us out and many of us left. And I wound up writing software for a company out of Houston to do fugitive emissions monitoring, which means, which means...
You do realize this is an art podcast.
I understand.
Okay.
And wrote specialty databases for them. What they did is provide crews to go into refineries to find leaks, to comply with the cleaning.
But at some point, at that point in 2009...
Yeah, underneath all that, I'm painting.
The whole time?
Yeah. It's
sure, like anybody has
spurts and here and there. But 2009...
You were a hobbyist at one point.
Yeah.
And became a professional.
Yeah.
About 15 years ago.
And I basically say I have an art career because it was a hobby that got out of hand.
There you go.
That's what happened, really.
I've known you since I came to the Museum of Western Art 5 years ago. Have visited with you, and you have a home in Taos and one in Fredericksburg, visited with both places, and I've gotten to be friends with you. You've been in our show for a number of years, and I didn't have a clue about that astronomy. Astronomy.
I do not predict the future, no.
And if you could, you'd be a great art buyer, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But for those of you playing along, and Steve, we have this all the time, we have people who listen to this podcast from our website, museumofwesternart.com, or they find it on their Apple podcast things, and we're a member of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network. Anyway, they listen to it, and then they have their laptops or their desktops open, and they go out to our website, and they can play along. We'll post photos of your work, pictures, link to your website. Mm-hmm. Let's get that out of the way. The website is what?
Basically, my name.
Yeah.
The letter C, the letter S, my last name, Talley.com, C.com.
Can't beat a deal like that when it's really very easy. People ask the museum, what's your website? It's Museum of Western Art. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
CSTalley.com, you can see more of Steve's works. You could purchase works off the website. You could reach out to him and make a deal on something if you see things that are light. And you can always call the Museum of Western Art, and we'll have pictures on our website of some of your works. You've been in our shows for a number of years here at the Museum of Western Art. Let's talk about your work. If I was forced to say, okay, what does Steve Talley paint? First word that comes to mind for me is nocturnes. Taos.
Yes.
Taos nocturnes.
Today I'm known a lot as a nocturne
Why
painter.
nocturnes? Why did you start doing nocturnes?
In the course of 34 years, this is a recent.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, recent as in 5, 6, 7.
See, and that's how long we've known each other.
Yeah.
I've been here 5 years. So all I've ever really known you to do, and you do them so well, are nocturnes. And you can see examples on our website of that.
So
What fascinates you about the night?
maybe because I'm an astronomer.
Isn't that funny? I've never put that together, but that's probably a very good answer for what we're doing here.
I love a good daytime painting too. I'm a landscape painter basically because my nocturnes are of the landscape and I throw adobe buildings in them. But what really inspired me about the nocturnes was I often, as in every evening after supper, I get on the laptop and I'm looking at auctions. I'm looking at and wondering what's for sale out there and because I'm also a collector. Which is
I am as well. So let's get together on what we're bidding on.
Yes. So
you may have been driving my prices up.
I really haven't purchased via auctions, but I look a lot. But because I learn of people I've never heard of out there. And I came across a nocturne painting that was just very pleasant for me. Right. And it was unlike the nocturnes like of Whistler and these guys. And it was related to the Southwest. It was these beat up old adobe houses, and the overall scene is a nocturne, but the building itself was punched up. It was like there was this big light from the sky coming down and just illuminating these buildings. And it was a very attractive painting to me. And it turned out that the guy who painted these was Will Sparks.
Okay.
And Sparks, if I recall, I think he died in like 1937. And I thought, I want to try some of that stuff. And so I didn't necessarily do like a copy.
Right.
I thought of, okay, how would Sparks punch up this building, and how does he design around the supporting background in the sky and all that. And I started painting them, and I'd throw them out in the gallery, and next thing you know, that's what's selling.
Well, you find your market, yeah.
Yeah.
Go with it.
Yeah, I wasn't like I was looking for a market, because I was selling regular old mountains and fields and trees, landscapes. But I'm going to say a half to a little more percentage-wise of my yearly sales are nocturnes. Yeah.
And again, that's what I know from your work. You'll be participating this year in our annual roundup, as you have the past number of years. The Museum of Western Art's annual roundup, the 41st annual roundup exhibition and sale, held this year in April 26, 27. That weekend. Anybody wants tickets, go out to our website. You can get your tickets for that event. It's quickly coming upon us. But as we moved it from September to April, and a chance to give us more opportunity, not as much football.
Yeah,
we don't have to fight as many events. Fall seems to be a very busy time of year in the art world, so we've moved it to April, and this will be the first year in a number of years that you've been able to actually attend and be here in person.
Yeah.
For that event.
Yeah, that's my own fault.
Maybe because you have a home in Taos and
Right.
you like to escape the heat of Texas.
Yeah, when we live in Taos, we typically come back to Fredericksburg here in Texas right at the end of October. And so if I were to drive here to attend the September
You have to
event,
go back and then come
I'd go
right back.
and
Yeah.
back again. But being in April is...
Oh, it's going to be great for everybody.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
It's going to be great for everybody. Let's talk about your galleries. You have a gallery over you're part of a gallery in Fredericksburg, and that's the Charlie Moran Gallery, Moran Fine Art, located there on Main Street in Fredericksburg, Texas. If anybody wants to see your work in a gallery setting, they can do that. And, of course, then the website, CS Talley.
Yeah.
You say we several times. You've mentioned briefly your wife, Jeanette.
Yes.
That's the we in that. And
Jeanette.
Jeanette.
She's a French-Canadian, and it's spelled gin like you drink. Jeanette.
Jeanette. And what a lovely lady she is. And does she ever have a part in your art world, or is that just something that she leaves? And the reason I ask is that so many spouses are involved in the art world as well. Ron Riddick comes to mind, and that you can't get to Ron Riddick unless you go through Natalie, his wife. Andy Thomas is the same way. Dina, you got to reach out to Dina. But pretty much everybody goes to Steve. They actually call Steve. And not Jeanette.
Yeah, she's pretty low-key in terms of visibility in my art to the public. But at home, our Texas home is built on a hill, so we got one side of the house is a one-story and one side is a two-story, and my studio is downstairs. And so I paint up a painting, and up the stairs I go, and I put it on the cabinet in the kitchen, and
let her critique it.
And she critiques.
Yeah, and so I find that spouses are probably the first level of critique.
Oh yeah.
With things. Let's talk about your paintings. For example, you paint a lot of things, mostly landscapes. What you would say that you do? Oil, acrylic. What is it?
Yeah.
What do you like? What do you want to paint in?
Oil. That's what I always wanted to paint in. When I started 34 or 5 years ago, I did start, and as I mentioned, the odor of the turpentine back then, I don't even know if odorless turpentine was available back then. Anyway, the odor, my wife said, "You're out of here." She said, "No."
It's me or the turpentine.
That's right. And so I switched to acrylics.
Yeah.
And so I did take workshops with Bill Hook, William Hook, and these acrylic painters. And
I love good acrylics. I think it's a fabulous way to get started in learning how to paint.
And what happened, though, once I moved to Fredericksburg in 2000.
Just turn a little bit till you turn. There you go.
In 2002, I started doing the local art club scene and that kind of thing. And I came to some demos here in Kerrville and saw a demo by Rod McGehee. And he was telling a story about how sick he was and went to the doctor, and the doctor says the turpentine's killing you. You gotta change or you're gonna die. And so
Well, it's like having your head in a bag of gas.
it is, yeah.
You know.
And Rod told the story about that, and so said, everybody said, well, Rod, what are you painting with? He said, I went to these water-soluble oils. And he said, they're just like oil. They are oil.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically,
Sure.
the linseed oil has a chemical voodoo so
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you can clean up with soap and water. And you don't, and anyway, and the light bulb went on for me, and I was like, I'm out of here with acrylics, and I'm going to go get some oil.
And I could make Jeanette happy at the same time.
And yeah, and so that's how I got to be an oil painter, was because watching Rod and learning about water solubles. And I've been painting with water solubles ever since, and we're coming up on 20 years now.
What's your typical art day look like? And the reason I ask is there's a lot of listeners we have on It's Art, Let's Talk About It, who are new in the game, and they want to know from people who've been painting a while, making a living at it, what are the secrets? And we have artists who'll say, I get up every morning at 6 o'clock and I paint until noon, and then take a 1 hour lunch and I paint until 5. And others who say, I paint when the inspiration hits, and it may be from 2 in the morning until 2 the next morning. It varies from artist to artist. What's your typical day look like?
There are many days I do nothing, which may sound like a horrible thing for some artists, because some artists, life is meaningless unless they have painted something every day.
Had an artist recently, and we didn't put it on in our podcast. He was telling me off the air he spent one entire day staring at the canvas. And
Well,
he said, I just couldn't put anything on the canvas because
Yeah.
nothing felt right. I reached down and get a little cerulean blue, and oh hell, that didn't look right. He kept cleaning his brush over and over, and at the end of the day, still had a blank gessoed canvas up on the.
Yeah. I guess a typical art week might be that I paint a couple of paintings, and I don't paint big. I'm not a 30 by 40 painter.
Yeah, most of yours are 1820s.
Are smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the three pieces that you have in our show this coming year are what?
They're
11 by 14s.
11114, a 1216, and a 912.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So smaller works.
Yeah. Yeah, I paint small mostly because I did a lot of plein air painting, and so I got accustomed.
So you're not like our buddy Phil Bob Borman who
Oh, no,
paints
no.
these,
No.
65 by 85 paintings.
No, not these aircraft carrier deck size paintings. No.
Phil Bob, if you're listening, man, we love you. But
Yeah, we do.
Come on, bring me something smaller.
But you can sell a lot more small paintings. People can afford $1,000 and under much readily than a $40,000-$50,000 painting. So
Yeah, you have to sell more of them
that's true.
to make a living.
And so you got to paint more. So I get to paint when I want to. I mean, there are things that get in the way. That I live on 2 acres up in Fredericksburg, and sometimes you got to mow the yard,
Yeah.
and sometimes you got to trim the trees and fix something.
How often do you paint plein air still?
Since I live in Fredericksburg more in the winter,
Okay.
I don't do so much here. I do a lot of plein air painting out when we're at our home in Taos.
Let's talk about some of your artist friends, especially those in Taos during conversations. And you were instrumental in helping us find a good Jerry Jordan for our 40th anniversary show. Guys, if you're listening along, go look that name up. Jerry Jordan, what a fabulous artist.
Absolutely.
Talk about others, because Taos is a painter's paradise.
Well, yeah.
It's a painter's mecca.
It is.
So who out there do you want to shout out to? Jerry, of course. I've heard you talk about him a lot, but
There's a lot of famous people who live there you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Would not know, you know of, but you wouldn't know. They're quiet. Don Brackett, Laura Robb lives there.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. And Laura's a very private person.
A lot of artists tend to be that
Yeah.
way as well.
Who else lives there? Sherry and David.
Okay.
David LaFell and Sherry McGraw. They live 6 miles from me. And
I was so honored when David was in Fredericksburg a year or so ago
yeah,
for a show at the Insight Gallery.
yeah.
And
They're having another one in March.
I walked up to him, and bless his heart, he looked at me and he said, Dr. Beauchamp, how are you?
Yeah.
How would you even remember me? We had met years and years ago when I was at a gallery in San Antonio, and he was part of that. I sold a bunch of his works over the years, but I was so thrilled and honored that he took the time to say hello, and he knew me, and he was so generous with his time.
David's 90.
And he's one of the great painters Golly.
Yeah, he's over the top, no, for sure, and he's a real treasure.
Yeah.
But he's 92 or 4 or something like
Yeah.
that. And prior to living in Taos, I'd only met him a few times. But the same thing happened to me. He was like, "Hi, Steve."
Yeah. No, it's
It's like,
amazing.
how does he remember? You know?
Yeah, such a great painter. Sherry McGraw lives up there, David LaFell,
Yeah.
Jerry Jordan, of course, we mentioned.
Yeah.
For our listeners, go out and look up those guys because they're just absolutely fabulous. And Taos is not a bad place to be for the arts.
No. Taos, art-wise, is on the map simply because of the Taos Society of Artists from
Right.
the early turn of the century.
Yeah, Sharp, Kaus,
Yeah.
Dunton, those kind of guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ones who, and you can go up there today and hit those galleries. And there's Fetchin, the Fetchin Society started there, and of course the Kaus Sharp House, and we have a lot of friends up there. So
There's the Harwood, the Blue and Shine House.
always fun to go up there and deal with the art, but it's an overdose of the
Yeah.
arts. But the light is pretty fascinating as well.
Yeah.
That have an influence in your work. He says as he remembers that Steve paints a lot of nocturnes. You know?
Yeah, when it's dark, it's just dark, you know. Yeah, Taos has altitude. The town of Taos we're at 7,000 feet, and we're not even in the mountains yet. And so that makes the air quite radiant because of its thinness. You see a lot of blue, intense blue in the sky when it's clear. And the monsoon season, when the thunderstorms roll through, and you can just see provided there's no forest fires in California blowing the smoke over. When the air is clear, you can just see forever. From my house, I can see the pitter now that Georgia O'Keeffe painted down at Ghost Ranch, and that's 90 miles. Yeah, the light is what attracts a lot of artists there. And of course, the culture is what brought the Taos Society people there. The Pueblo, the Tiwa folks there. The joke about Taos is the population of Taos is 5,000, and 6,000 of them are artists.
There's a lot of artists in Taos.
There's a lot.
I think about my Rolodex, and man, a lot of them have the Taos,
Yeah.
address. It's a lot of fun to be a part of that. But Fredericksburg, half the year, is that a get out of the winter of Taos thing?
Yeah.
And you have a connection, of course, to San Antonio. And
Yeah. We've been doing the Taos thing for coming up on 7 years now. And so we've been in Fredericksburg for 22 years.
Okay. Right.
My wife being Canadian, she's had enough cold. And Taos doesn't get 40 below zero, but
It's cold enough, though.
it gets cold enough, yeah. It gets down to zero. But the snow there, the snow persists in the mountains, and thus the Taos Ski Valley.
Right.
But basically down in Taos itself, it'll be snow for 3 or 4 days, and then it's gone, melts.
Yeah. What's next for Steve Talley? It's a progression of, you started taking lessons in portraiture,
Yeah.
went to landscape, painted in oils and had to give that up, went to acrylic, gave that up, and went to water-based oil. But it seems like right now you're doing a lot more teaching. You're doing some workshops. You're doing a workshop for us, so let's go ahead and plug that workshop for us. You can go onto our website, and there's already a flyer out there where you can click a button and sign up for Steve's workshop this is coming summer, actually in May.
May 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, so in the beginning of May, here in a couple of months. And we've already got about half of the class filled. So if people want to go out there and sign up for it, they need to do that when they hear this broadcast. Go out and to the website or call the museum at 830-896-2553 and talk to McKenna, and she'll get you signed up. But you've taught a couple of workshops. You're teaching a lot more, it looks like. Where are you headed, man?
Yeah, workshops can be a good income if you do a lot of them, but my main goal is to paint.
Yeah.
I enjoy doing maybe a workshop a year, something like that. Private lessons. If people ask me, "Will you teach me?" I'll probably will. But I don't hang a shingle out on my front lawn and say lessons available here. That's not my business model. So what's next in art? So what's been very interesting is years and years ago, because of my wife, I became Roman Catholic.
Okay.
And I'm a good, what people would call a good Catholic. I go to Mass every day, and not every day, but every Sunday, and we say our prayers at night and all that. And I enjoy religious art, sacred art.
Okay.
So the Baroque period, the Renaissance going into those All that art was basically religion.
And I've
during
noticed
those-
in your work, even the three pieces that you got, and then works from previous roundups, a lot of them are churches.
Yes.
A lot of the pueblos that you're talking about,
And
sacred spots.
so I show at two galleries in Taos, and one of them is and it's not a gallery, it's a gift shop, and it's the Benedictine monks
Okay,
of Taos
yeah, I know
gift
it.
shop.
Sure, I know it well.
And I have an agreement between my main gallery that I can show some paintings there. They're not my main gallery, which is Jones Walker of Taos.
Right.
They're not very territorial because I supply them with everything that they want.
So you've got three galleries that you
Three.
deal with, right? The
Yeah.
Benedictine
Yeah.
gift shop,
Yeah.
the Jones
Walker,
Jones Walker.
and then Charlie.
Moran on Main Street in Fredericksburg, Texas. So.
Yeah, and so I will paint churches in a nocturne way, and those primarily go into the Benedictine monks gift shop. The other nocturnes of just buildings or in general that are non-church looking, they go to Jones Walker. And then I have nocturnes here, of course, too. But I'm also a big fan of iconography.
Okay.
And so I'm learning to do some of that very stylized, the Orthodox Russian, Ukrainian type of icons. And I like the Caravaggios and the Rembrandts and all that.
Yeah.
Consequently, I'm saying 30 whatever years ago, I started out in portraiture, and now here I'm coming back.
So
I'm
art tends to make a circle sometimes.
Because it's without painting a church or a person and saying it's Mary or Joseph or somebody or Jesus, whatever. Mm-hmm. A portrait's a portrait. And so to paint in that style, I've started studying with David LaFell and Sherry.
What a great pair of artists those guys
I know.
are. My
it's like,
goodness.
it's if you're going to do it good. You know?
And I was so honored that we had a chance to meet David, had a chance to renew a friendship with David.
Yeah.
And anytime you can see his work, and Sherry's as well, anytime
Yeah.
you see their work, it's a blessing to be a part of that.
Yeah. A lot of folks, I've heard a lot of folks in the past talk about David and he seemed a little uppity, but David's confident.
David's he's a
It is-
good guy and
it-
a great painter, and
he-
it shows.
He is a
his work.
wonderful person, and he
Yeah.
reads widely. David, I've had lunch with him and Sherry and all that, and we can talk quantum physics.
Yeah.
We can talk philosophically about art and not about, well, yes, he can answer the question, what's the best mediums and what's the best paint, what's all that stuff. But when you get into, that's why I'm reading this book.
Yeah.
It's more of a philosophical thoughts about art and what it means. And that ties into why I really, in a way, paint small, is because I want people to have these paintings. I need to pay for the paint. I need to pay for all that stuff. And so I have to sell the painting.
I'll tell you right now, people say it's important because I'm the director of the Museum of Western Art. I'm a collector of Steve Talley's work. I've got one in my office right now. It'll go to my home when I leave here. I just couldn't be any more proud of owning Steve Talley.
Thank you.
Talk to that young person out there who's trying to decide whether they want to be an astronomer or an artist. And I mean, is it an either-or situation? Doesn't sound like it is. It's a pursue your passion situation.
When I'm in doing art walk and people ask me a very much the questions you've been asking me. How'd you get started? What'd you do? And I say, actually, I'm an astronomer, physicist guy. And the eyes roll and they're like, how's that possible? How can the left brain and the right brain?
They are two different hemispheres.
And it is two different things, but in my personal concept of what I do, it's all the same stuff. And if you ever really sit down and listen to some of these highfalutin physicists and astronomers of the past, there is a beauty that happens in science. And art, for me, is about beauty. I'm not interested in propaganda.
Yeah.
At all.
It's a great place to wrap this conversation up. Art's about beauty. We've been visiting today with our good friend Steve Talley, CS Talley. If you're out there in the art world looking him up, go to cstalley.com for the website. Works are available at the Moran Gallery, Morin, Moran Gallery in Fredericksburg, Texas, at the Jones
Walker of Taos.
I always forget the Walker, Jones Walker in Taos Gallery. And the Benedictine Muck Gift Shop there in Taos also. Or here at the Museum of Western Art, we'll have 3 works in our for sale. Of course, we want to always sell works here at the Museum of Western Art. But Steve, thank you for joining us today on It's Art, Let's Talk About It.
Thanks for having me.
It wasn't too painful, was it?
Not at all.
Not
I almost enjoy talking about it as much as I do painting.
Yeah, and somebody asked me one time, why we call this podcast It's Art, Let's Talk About It. Because, God, I love talking about art.
Yeah.
It just brings a joy to me. And I get a chance to meet artists that and find out things about them. Like, I didn't know, for example, Rachel Brownlee was a marathon runner. I didn't know that Ron Riddick had a dad who was in the art world himself, and that he had met the Sorolla family. And you learn things about people as you go along, right? And it's a variety of things. It's the only profession, and I've expressed this so many times to people, it's the only profession where all you have to do is say, I am an artist. And you are an artist. You can't be proven wrong, right? Because it's such a subjective thing. So when we say it's art, let's talk about it, it's a fascinating conversation because they're all different. They all have the same basic approaches with art, but it's a lot of fun to learn more about people. So if you want to learn more about Steve Talley, go out to cstalley.com or go to the Museum of Western Art or come visit us here at 1550 Bandera Highway in Kerrville, Texas. We're 5 miles off Interstate 10, which is the other side of town, but it's a beautiful town to drive through, be a part of our world as well. And Steve, thanks for joining us on It's Art. Let's talk about it.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of It's Art, Let's Talk About It, a production of the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. We hope you'll visit the museum in person. We're located at 1550 Bandera Highway in Kerrville, Texas. Find out more about us by going to www.museumofwesternart.com. And we hope you'll join us next time for It's Art, Let's Talk About It. The podcast is produced by the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.